This regular Medicine Hat City Council meeting is called to order at 6:30 p.m. on Monday, February 5th, 2024. We will begin with a moment for prayer or reflection. Thank you. Just need 1 second. Thank you. I'll now read our land acknowledgement. The City of Medicine Hat acknowledges that we live and work on treaty territory. The city pays respect to all Indigenous peoples and honors their past, present, and future. We recognize and respect their cultural heritages and relationships to the land. Moving on to item 5, adoption of previous council meeting minutes. They are the regular council meeting minutes of January 15th, 2024. Are there any errors or omissions? Okay.
Just when I was, sorry, thank you, Mayor Clark. I've already spoken to our city clerk about this. There was just a question I had about vote on a bylaw. We had a second and third reading and it showed 8 people voted, but nobody was absent. But Councillor Sharps had been out of the room. I think it was just a matter of how we would note that in the minutes, that she wasn't absent the whole meeting, just that piece. But I understand that the city clerk has got a plan to amend that already for the public record.
Yeah, that is actually very important because we are required to vote on. So it should be noted that maybe she left the room or, yeah, okay. Seeing no further errors or omissions, the council adopts the minutes as amended for the January 15th, 2024 regular city council meeting. Adoption of the agenda. Calling for additions, and I know Councillor McGrogan has one addition, so go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to add, I move that council adds designation of assessment review board chair and alternate position as a new item under new business.
I'll second that.
So we will add that, since there is no new business listed, we'll add that as item 10.1. Actually, we will need to vote. So you're making that motion. Do we have a seconder?
I did second it.
Sorry, I was writing. Councillor Knodel.
This is a separate issue, so we could vote first and then I could speak to what I was hoping to speak to. Did we have to vote?
Yes, but it just is additions to the agenda.
I just want to make one quick announcement in regards to Anne's anniversary.
Do you want to, but we can wait till councillor announcements for that item.
Yep, whatever works.
Okay, so we will vote on the amendment to the agenda. That's unanimous. Any further amendments? Seeing none, the agenda is adopted as amended. Councillor announcements. So Councillor Knodel and Councillor Hirsch both have announcements, and Councillor Sharps. So Councillor Knodel, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. So I just want to say happy 1-year anniversary to our city manager, Anne. After a series of temporary city managers, Anne Mitchell moved to Medicine Hat to accept the permanent role of city manager at the City of Medicine Hat. She has embraced a dynamic and complex role of supporting council goals and leading staff through ongoing change. Anne has been a consistent, communicative, and charismatic force since her arrival. Her perceptive nature has allowed for forward momentum on lofty goals in a short amount of time. On behalf of council, I would like to recognize and send heartfelt gratitude for Anne as not only a leader, but a feisty, determined, and caring person who I feel lucky to sit at this table with.
Councillor Hirsch?
Thanks, Your Worship. As Chair of Audit, I just wanted to do a notable congratulations. And Medicine Hat News already covered it, and I will read it verbatim. So the City of Medicine Hat is a recipient of the Government Finance Officers Association, the GFOA, which is the Triple Crown Award for the year ending 2022. The Triple Crown is awarded to municipalities that receive all 3 financial reporting awards: Canadian Award for Financial Reporting, the Award for Outstanding Achievement in Popular Annual Financial Reporting, and the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award for the 2-year budget beginning January 1st, 2023. So congratulations to all those that contributed to our success. I think it just is a testament, and just to maybe serves as a reminder and a demonstration to our citizens that our financial reporting and the way we conduct our business is at the highest level. So congrats to everyone. Thanks.
Did you have one more, Councillor Hirsch? No, I don't. Okay. Councillor Sharps?
Thank you, and through the chair, I just have really 2 quick ones. On Monday, last Monday, all of council was invited, but it was very short notice. But we made an attempt and a drive out to the city of Brooks, and the city manager and I went, and it was awesome. So we met with the city, the mayor, one of the councillors, we went out to the county, and it was really nice to see how the city and the county work so collaboratively together. They were all excited to welcome us, and they're really excited about doing something with us. So I just wanted to let everybody know that it was nice, not just to work as, or communicate as a Southeast region, but just as a region. And they really want to do more with us. And also on Saturday, Councillor McGrogan, myself, and City Manager Mitchell were all out at the new community resource opening in Cypress County in Irvine. So again, the Minister of Municipal Affairs was there, Rick McIver, MLA Wright, and it was overall a full house. It was a great resource center that started. There was a little bit of controversy surrounding them, and they really pulled through, and it is such a dynamic center for all ages. And again, they were thrilled that council came out. So they're really grateful for the relationships that we're making with them. So that's it.
All right, seeing no further council announcements, we'll move on to the consent agenda, item 8. And I will ask now if any councillor has any items from the consent agenda that they would like to pull out for discussion. Councillor Robbins?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Clark. I just wanted to talk about 2 things from the January 22nd, 2024 Public Services Committee meeting. It'll be quite brief.
Okay, so we'll pull that out and deal with it. If it's, okay, we'll pull that one out and deal with it after we receive the, approve the consent agenda. Can I get a motion to adopt the consent agenda items as presented, except for pulling the January 22nd, 2024?
I make that motion.
Okay,
I can second that.
thank you. So we'll vote on the consent agenda items. That's unanimous. So Councillor Robbins, over to you for Public Services Committee meeting minutes, January 22, 2024.
Yes, I just wanted to highlight 2 things from the minutes. One, we had a verbal update from our Managing Director Stouth, who indicated that a community inclusion coordinator had been hired, and that was very exciting news for the committee and also for the Community Vibrancy Board, who had worked with the Truth and Reconciliation Recommendations Committee. I know I get that right. So she was attended at the Community Vibrancy Board and introduced herself and started gathering stories and telling stories, which is, I understand, a big part of her purpose. So if anyone wants to talk to her, I think she's very interested in making those connections within the community. The other thing that we got an update about was the Arts, Heritage, and Entertainment Master Plan. So coming up This week, next week, on the 13th, is the municipal mingle at the Esplanade. So an opportunity to come in person and talk about the future of arts, heritage, and entertainment. And as well, the online survey in Shape Your City is still open until February 19th. So opportunities for people to be involved in different ways in the city there.
All right. So we'll need a motion to adopt the minutes as presented.
Yes, so with those highlights, I will make a motion to adopt the Public Services Committee meeting minutes of January 22nd, 2024 for the corporate record.
All right. We will vote. That is unanimous. We'll now move on to an item that was postponed from last meeting. It is item 9.1, 532 South Railway Street Southeast, former food bank location. And the sponsor is Energy, Land, and Environment. So we'll have a brief intro. Thank you, or an intro.
Thank you, Your Worship. In front of you, you'll find a revised briefing note from what you will have seen at the last session. As noted, this was discussed at the December 18th council meeting, and there were some questions as to how we arrived at this point, including questions related to the conditions precedents and how those were resolved or not. And with context that, of course, in recent months, we've established an entirely new land team without continuity to when this had occurred. The team did go back and went through a number of sources of where the different files are held and identified that the prior city manager had waived the conditions precedents after related information identified during the due diligence phase prompted a revisit of the analysis of the fair market value of the two properties that were being exchanged. And at that time, the city manager confirmed through the revisited analysis that the exchange value was still within the allowable 10% of fair market value. So the transaction proceeded accordingly. That brings us to today, and really staff are looking to confirm how to proceed with respect to the property. It is surplus, and we are incurring carrying costs for long as we hold it. The recommended list price is for the land value at $249,900 on an as-is, whereas basis. And we've arrived at that conclusion largely reflecting on the status of the property. The mechanical system is in poor condition and would need to be replaced shortly if it was going to be continue to be used as a facility. The layout itself has been changed and adjusted over time and perhaps is challenging for potential interested parties. And most importantly, in terms of materiality, any material refurbishment of the property and any demolition would face significant hazardous materials abatement costs. So as such, we are recommending to establish a list price based on the value of the land and subsequently market it through a realtor. We have identified alternate options for council's consideration, including possibilities of considering a higher list price, but if the interest is less than within 10% of that higher list price, we would need to return to council before proceeding any further. We've also identified an option to lease the property at fair market value, and a third option that perhaps we could lease the property at a nominal charge to a community interest group, and we've identified the various considerations for each of those options. And if there's any detailed questions, I do also have members of our team with us, and at the podium is Manager Buckner. Thank you.
Welcome. I have a question. The process for, I was just trying to get clarity on the acquisition and sales policy number 0151. So the last sentence of the recommendation in the briefing notice that administration recommends listing the property with a member of the Medicine Hat Real Estate Board approved under the procedures of the acquisition and sales policy. Can you explain that, like what approval is and how they, I believe that it's in conjunction with the Medicine Hat Real Estate Board, but I think it would be helpful to have a bit more clarity on that.
Through the chair to Mayor Clark, our current policy for listing with a realtor outlines that they have to be an approved member of the Medicine Hat Real Estate Board. We do have the flexibility to work with them to establish who that is. And that is what we would be doing in this case moving forward with a realtor, is they would need to be licensed as a residential and a commercial realtor in order to meet the policy as it stands today.
So can you describe the selection process for that?
So currently, through the chair, we do have the discretion to choose that member. Something we are looking to do as we reset both our land strategy and our policies is to relook at that criteria. We recently met with the Medicine Hat Real Estate Board and had a really good discussion with them about how to select a realtor moving forward. We're currently working with them as well to establish that criteria. So there is a bit of a legacy of it being a bit of a discretionary process, but we are looking to bring some clarity to that shortly.
Thank you. Councillor Robbins.
Yes, thank you. And through the chair, just the last time we dealt with a surplus property, it was the Monarch Theatre. So we had different considerations, and first there was an expression of interest and then an RFP to work through the issues, and so council could make a decision about what to do with the Monarch Theatre. And so I see on this surplus property, we don't have that same process. Can you, I know there's a historic component to the Monarch, and of course we discussed that at length, but I just wonder if you could tell me why in this case we wouldn't also have that other procedure in place.
Through the chair, could you clarify just what procedure this was?
Pardon me,
Could
sorry.
you clarify which procedure this was?
Oh, the procedure of having an expression of interest first and then an RFP.
Okay, yes. Through the chair to Councillor Robbins, through this, we have had some ad hoc interest, but it was realized that this property doesn't hold a lot of interest for the community in circumstances where we have a property where we know there might be multiple interested parties. That is an option that we can look at, is through an RFP or an expression of interest. Through this, we've received some interest in it. Most of it was for a lower value amount than what was deemed to be something we'd be interested in, but we haven't had a lot of interest in this property. I think by listing it through a realtor as well, we may see some interest, but the competitive process wasn't deemed to be necessary for this property.
Thank you very much.
All right. I don't see any other speakers. Would someone like to make a motion to accept the recommendation or otherwise? Councillor Van Dyke?
Sorry, I had a question about procedure because it was a postponed motion. Okay, thank you.
So we would need to make the motion?
I move that the motion made at December 18th, 2023 meeting be amended to read as follows. The council authorizes administration to offer for sale the property described at 532 South Railway Street Southeast, as is, where is the property, for land value with full disclosure of the city's available information regarding Phase 1 environmental site assessment, 2, the hazardous material assessment, and 3, the facility condition assessment report with an approved member of the Medicine Hat Real Estate Board as presented.
I'll second that motion.
Councillor Dumanowski.
Your Worship, I do actually have a question and then maybe a thought on this before we vote, but trying to understand the discrepancy between what the initial property value was when the transaction was made with the food bank root cellar, as it's currently known, and the reduction in price at fair market with taking into consideration hazardous material abatement. When I read that line, and I'm not trying to pick it out, but it does say, should demolition or substantial renovation be required by an ultimate buyer? So I'm trying to understand how value is determined without knowing what a buyer might want to do with that property. We're taking the step, the unusual step, I would suggest, of discounting it based on that statement without knowing what another buyer or the acquirer of that property would want to do. You know, from a moral standpoint, I don't also want to sell a property that has almost $250,000 in abatement without taking into consideration that somebody who would do that would not necessarily, would be on the hook for that. And it would be, I guess, a problem for me to sell something as is, whereas if that isn't a strong consideration for somebody who would buy the property for a different purpose than maybe what it was intended or how it was being used prior to that. We all know we've had some informal interest in that property, and so I'm trying to reconcile those things on behalf of myself, but also on behalf of the constituents who are now essentially losing almost $250,000 in transacted value between what was on the books and what we're prepared to sell it for. So I don't know if that's something you can speak to. I'm trying to reconcile that for myself.
Go ahead.
Through the chair to Councillor Dumanowski, the current recommendation does list the land for the price of the land, taking into consideration that if someone were to purchase it and wanted to do renovations or needed to do renovations, there would be costs associated with abatement or other work that is required. So the listed price, which was determined through a third-party valuation, was taking into consideration the cost of the land and not necessarily the building that is on it, recognizing that there are concerns with that if someone is to move in and wanting to utilize that building.
Just to follow up, so it does say substantial renovation. Any building that is acquired by another party certainly does renovations. And I don't want to start, I guess, getting into qualifying words, but substantial means something much more significant to me. If there were a value placed on that building that was similar to its previous status, to me that would not equate to substantial and therefore alter a price, by a significant amount. For me, it really comes down to, and I was on the last council, I'm on this council, so I can say it's because I was part of the decision last time and this time, and I'm struggling with that disparity based on, I'm going to call it a small technicality. And that's being nice when I say technicality. And certainly I'm not suggesting that we're not all considering the public purse here, but we're talking a substantial amount of money, and it's, to say it lightly, unfortunate that that was not taken into consideration when we used taxpayer money to acquire that property, only to a few years later now have to take a significant discount at their expense, literally, to complete what we think is probably the intended purpose of demolition at some point. So it seems a little hurried to me as well. So I'm not sure, and I'm not trying to create a conspiracy, but I don't know if we have somebody on the line who wants to acquire the land or not, but it just seems hurried to me. We've had many properties in the past that I can recall that were held, and in some cases we had no other options. They were lands that were developed, and the property itself wasn't being sold. But at some future point, we realized the profits that we probably had hoped to realize at the development stage, plus 10 years, 15 years. So there were inflationary benefits that came with that. So I'm just wondering, without looking at all the other options here, would it not be in our interest to even just hold the property? I know there are some carrying costs that are indicated here of $18,000 a year, but it's not an insignificant piece of property on I think, a piece of land that is in the core of our city, and it may have opportunities that we can't believe or realize right now at some future point. So I'm really struggling with that, if I'm being honest. So other than express an opinion, I guess my thought was rather than looking at alternate options, just holding it, and maybe that is indicator, just holding it for now and seeing what kind of interests might develop in the next short term, and I don't know what short term is, might be a few years before we decide to divest of this at a substantial loss.
Managing Director Pancoast.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Dumanowski, I appreciate your point, and certainly typically in order for us to move the property, the first step is to establish a list price. What's identified as one of the options is we could choose to establish the list price at a higher level. Our assumption is that if there is sufficient interest in the community to garner a bit of competition, that they certainly don't need to stay at the indicated list price. It could lift above. But that being said, to my knowledge, we do not have anyone interested that has put anything in writing on the hook, as you've indicated. This truly is just to be able to start working with a realtor to identify interested parties and move forward. I will also suggest the value of the broader context that this was an exchange of two properties, and this was one piece of the broader exchange. So there was a cash component as well as this component. So even though there's a larger discrepancy on this particular portion of the property, it's still relatively manageable within the broader context of the total value of the exchange, if that's helpful. Recognizing, I believe the initial exchange value was the 1.3 million ballpark. So this is one piece of that. And part of that revisitive analysis that was done by prior leadership and staff recognized that with respect to abatement costs, there was an offsetting value on each of the properties. And that's where they were able to reconcile and be comfortable. Perhaps I'd have to double check where this actually went onto our books as, if it was the full 500,000, but it was recognized as within that 10% of exchange for exchange value across the properties.
Just one final follow-up. Thank you for that. For me, and I appreciate the comparison you drew to the two properties and how it was put on the books, so to speak. To me, that just, and I'm not suggesting what you said complicates it, but it even complicates it more for me, because it suggests to me that where we saw an advantage, we were able to put a purchase price that was favorable on the one property in order to make the final transaction occur, only to find out once we separate it that there is on paper a discounted price based on that original purchase price. So to me, it's a like for like, and that's how I look at it. Maybe it's simplistic, but that's how I look at it. When I think about carrying costs and creating purpose, I look at our old arena that's been sitting there for a number of years. I'm sure if this facility is carrying $18,000 a year in carrying costs, I would imagine the old arenas is multiple fold to that. So, and yet we are not in an immediate hurry. I know there were some hopes there for sure. I'm not going to lose sight of that, but we're not in an immediate hurry to knock it down just to get it down. So for that reason, I guess I'm struggling with this, so I will not be supporting the motion this evening.
Councillor Hirsch.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just, you were so close to not stealing my thunder, but you got me at the end with the arena. And it's funny because we've sitting with an asset that's a little bit stranded as well with the Medicine Hat Arena that is, upon determination of and feasibility of using it again, is determined that it's just not inhabitable. So, and here we are with it. And quite frankly, when I came back on council, I was somewhat surprised that still was standing. So, because we have an event center, and that was the whole idea, was that was going to be demolished. But that is not the issue of the day. The question I have, though, is I appreciate the fact, the history, and again, We know that an uninhabited building means there's no maintenance, et cetera. So there has been decay for sure. We acknowledge that. Where I'm going and I'm wondering is, and it actually just triggered off of Councillor Robbins' point on, is there an ability for us to do a full transparent discussion piece and do, I think the members of the community know what they have in the old food bank building. Is there an ability to do an RFP of a social group or any other nonprofit that can say, hey, this is a diamond in the rough with a little bit of elbow grease, et cetera, we can maybe utilize this. So my thought goes to like an RFP or something of an attempt in because I look at the calendar, it's February. So the idea of doing any type of tangible renovations or anything in that regard is really, really early. So I'm wondering in the next 6 weeks, we could do a RFP, do a quick vet in terms of if there's any interest of qualified applicants, of course, that would enter into a lease agreement. And upon that exhaustion of options, we look at selling the property. So I don't know if that's concept or just anyone got any feedback from you.
Managing Director Pancoast.
Thank you, through your worship, to Councillor Hirsch. That is one of the options that are identified within the briefing note to identify whether it's the will of council to look for this property to be leased to not-for-profit type of groups for the benefit of the community. Our base assumption always starts with transacting based on as close to fair market value as possible. However, if it is the will of council, we are happy to try to accommodate that type of arrangement. We are moving more and more to try to identify what the deemed subsidy value would be between a fair market value and the actual lease amount, and to try to keep the land portfolio whole, and would charge the difference to typical reserve as would be suggested appropriate through finance. But yes, if that is the will of council to look for a subsidized lease arrangement for the benefit of community stakeholder groups, we could facilitate that.
Councillor McGrogan.
Thank you. Some good points raised. I probably won't move off what I've already said around this owning this property, and I'm in favor of the motion to list this. I think we have to cut our losses, if we want to put it that way, and move on. I just can imagine the amount of work that would go into having our staff, first off, try to identify people in an expression of interest. Secondly, then what negotiation do we come up with in a lease, and what improvements are we going to do to a building that's probably past its lifetime anyway? So I'm not gonna, I think, and the other issue that you brought up, Managing Director Pankos, is we kind of did a switcheroo with the fire hall and I think that in that we have a value that may also have been inflated about the value of the fire hall. And I don't know, and I'm not second guessing it. So it's really a trade-off of values here, and at the end of the day, what can we get for it? I'm not in favor of owning Baltic Avenue. I think we should be getting out of some of these dilapidated properties and getting in the business that we need to be getting into as far as running our municipality. So I'm going to support this motion.
Councillor Canoto.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. So I have a bit of a mixed mind in regards to this motion, but lean more heavily towards what Councillor McGrogan just spoke to. I do appreciate that there is possible appreciation in the value of the land, and don't see that so much in the building, of course, considering the condition. I see the transparent point A, B, and C being essential as we move forward into what I think is the best decision, which is sale of the property. I think we look at the complexity of ownership, as Councillor McGrogan said, and I think that there is opportunity for the right developer, business person to come along and turn it into something that could bring life to the space in a way that is valuable to our downtown core. So I see moving forward into the future with this particular motion being one of a sale rather than a holding on to it.
Councillor Sharps?
Thank you, and through the chair, I just had one quick question. In the event of the alternate options being used and we decided to lease the property, if we are the owner of this property and we lease it, would it not be our responsibility to bring everything up to code and abatement? Okay. So we would put in a couple of $100,000 to fix it and then lease it at at a lower rate?
Managing Director Pancoast?
Thank you. Through the chair, assuming we could find someone that would be willing to lease the property as is without any significant refurbishment, we could at least avoid for now the abatement costs for hazardous abatement. But certainly, because we've identified the mechanical system to be in poor condition, I anticipate that we would face some costs to bring that back into good condition as a minimum.
Okay, thank you. So based on that, I would absolutely support this motion to sell this property. I don't really want to fix it up to hold it and then still take a loss on it. It makes sense to just take the loss now.
Councillor Van Dyke?
Yes, thank you, and through the chair. So I'm going to repeat a little bit what other councillors have said. I think in some situations, it makes sense for the city to hold a property to find the right buyer or the right use for it, and the Monarch being an excellent example of that, where the historical value of a building is important to maintain, and we want to make sure that it's going to be cared for in the proper way once it goes to a new owner. So in those situations, I do completely support the idea of maintaining ownership of property. And of course, obviously, public use buildings where the general public uses and accesses services and programs provided by the city, those as well, I agree, should be owned and maintained by the city. But in the case of a commercial property like this, where, it's very similar to other properties available in the city and there's no significant historical value, I fully support the sale. I don't know that holding it for any continued length of time would change the outcome, other than potentially costing us more money in maintenance and potentially the value of the building going down with time instead of rising with time. I also think that if we were to maintain ownership and look at leasing, it might prevent the purchase of the property by neighboring businesses that could use that space for something completely different. And if we are maintaining that building in that place, it could be actually thwarting growth of businesses and other organizations that might want to use it for something else. So I support the sale of this property. Thank you.
All right. Seeing no further speakers, we will vote on the motion as presented on the screen. Yes, it is an amendment to the original motion that was put forward on December 18th. And that passes. Item 10.1, oh, just a second. Okay. So we passed the amendment to the motion, and now we have to vote on the motion as amended. Okay. All right, that passes as well. Item 10.1, designate assessment review board chair and alternate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that council designates Don Knutson as chair of the Combined Assessment Review Board until December 31st, 2026, and that council designate Trevor Hennis as alternate to the Combined Assessment Review Board.
I'll second that.
Just one question. We're adding an end date for Mr. Knutson. There's no end date for the Mr. Haynes as alternate. Is that as intended? City Clerk?
Sorry, thank you, Mayor Clark. Yeah, I apologize for that. I would suggest adding an end date for Mr. Hennis. One thing to note with this too is that Mr. Allen's appointment expires at the end of 2024. So at that point, if council chooses to add an alternate, again, you know, they'd look at appointing an entirely new individual to make it 4, but without that, you know, by default, one of the remaining 2 could be appointed as alternate.
So what's the date? For Hennis, yeah, Mr. Hennis. December 21st. 31st, 2024.
2026.
Chair is recommending 2024.
Point of order. So you're absolutely right with the initial conversation that as long as Trevor Hennis is a member of the board, he will continue on that. I don't know when the expiry date on that is. I'm actually okay with the way it's worded already because when the expiry of his term ends, so obviously does his role as the alternate. Because then we will in turn do the same process going forward. So as it's written, I'm completely fine with it because his designate as an alternate will end when his term ends.
City Clerk, you're okay with that?
Thank you, Mayor Clark. The only issue I see is that at the end of 2024, the board will be down to 3 members, which is the minimum and proper number. So an alternate won't be necessary at that time. So to appoint Mr. Hennis for 3 years as an alternate right now, I'm not sure that would work because I think at the end of this year, assuming Mr. Allen's expiry date, you know, comes at December 31st, 2024, he drops off, the board's down to 3, and no alternate would technically be needed, right? The alternate is kind of an optional thing that I think council chose to do a few years ago. So if that makes any sense, I would recommend Mr. Hennis being appointed as an alternate for this year only, to the end of 2024. That's an alternate, and then that alternate piece would drop off, and he would be a sitting and regular full member of the board at that time, unless something else were to change.
So December 31st, 2024.
Okay, so it's second already. What's the procedure?
So we'll have to,
So you'd have
Amend.
to offer a friendly amendment. So I can do that if you wish. Friendly amendment, I would move that council designates Don Knutson as chair of the Combined Assessment Review Board until December 31st, 2026, and that council designate Trevor Hennis as alternate to the Combined Assessment Review Board until December 31st, 2024.
Second.
Thank you.
so we do still have to vote even though it's a friendly amendment. So we'll vote on the amendment. That passes, so now the motion as amended is on the table. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote on the motion as presented on the screen. That is unanimous. We have a bylaw for first reading at item 11.1. This is bylaw 4806 to amend the land use bylaw to rezone 19 Stober Bay Southeast to mixed-use district. And this is for first reading only, and the public hearing will be on March 4th, 2024. So we will vote on first reading. Sorry, I'm really sorry. Yes, we
So I
will.
move the council gives first reading to bylaw 4806, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend the land use bylaw to rezone 19 Stober Bay Southeast to mixed-use district.
Second.
All right, now we will vote. That is unanimous. I have not been advised of any notices of motion. Are there any council member reports? Seeing none, this council meeting is adjourned at 7:15 PM.